My story probably starts in my earliest childhood memories. I was about 5 or 6 when my parents chose to purchase a holiday caravan along the southern coastline near Weymouth. From that day forward, every school break became a routine of packing our things and traveling there for the entire holiday. Since my dad had work obligations, he couldn't always come with us. So for most of the year, it was just my mom, my 2 sisters, and me spending time at the trailer. After a few years, my dad upgraded to a bigger one. And soon, we started inviting various friends and relatives to escape the city with us for a while. The trailer park had plenty of families from all over the country, and when my mom took us there without my dad, we had to entertain ourselves around the park and nearby areas. Having a family car in the 50s was a bit of a luxury. Not many people had one back then. Unfortunately, my mom never got the hang of driving. She did give it a shot, but managed to terrify a couple of driving instructors before ultimately calling it quits. There was never a shortage of kids around the site to hang out with, though my sisters always acted like they were too mature to play with little boys. The person I connected with the most was Harry. Harry was a year older than me, and from the moment we met, we just clicked. She had a large red birthmark covering the left side of her face, which, for some reason, caused other kids to avoid her. I never understood why. It didn't bother me, and since she was a total tomboy, she made a great companion. Honestly, if Harry's family wasn't at the trailer park during a particular school break, I found the place pretty dull. She was an only child, and our friendship felt more like a sibling bond than just 2 kids hanging out. My older sisters, on the other hand, were insufferably snobby back then. As time went on, climbing cliffs and tossing stones into the ocean lost its excitement. By then, Harry and I had explored every hidden corner for miles. We had even discovered spots where we could spy on young couples sneaking off together. At 10, we were curious, trying to make sense of what they were doing. But as we grew older and started understanding more about the world, those little spying adventures began to feel uncomfortable. We never talked about it, but we had such a close connection that we instinctively knew when the other felt weird about something. By then, we were allowed to take the bus into Weymouth on our own, where we wandered around town and explored the harbor. Sometimes, ignorant people would make cruel remarks about Harry's birthmark. More than once, I ended up getting into fights over it. I could tell the comments hurt her, even though she rarely showed it. Around the time we were 12, Harry started using makeup to cover the mark. Honestly, I thought it made things look worse, but I never told her that. By then, we had started going to the dances at the Trailer Parks Club. We had been going for years. Kids had activities in the morning, younger ones danced in the afternoon, and then older kids took over in the early evening before the adults had their turn. Now, though, Harry and I were part of the older group. The bouncers at the club knew us well, and if anyone dared to say something cruel about Harry's face, they usually stepped in before I even had the chance to react. They knew I wouldn't let anyone upset her. Then, during the Easter break when I was 15, Harry disappeared. My family arrived at the trailer park the day before Good Friday, and the first thing I did was rush to Harry's trailer, only to find it locked up and abandoned. A visit to the site office revealed that her family had sold it. That vacation ended up being the worst I had ever experienced. My parents tried to keep me busy, and my dad even attempted to track down Harry's family. It wasn't until years later that he told me what had happened. Harry's father had passed away from influenza over the winter, and her mother could no longer afford to keep the trailer. She had to sell it. My dad had hoped to find their new address so I could at least write to her, but he had no luck. Strangely, even though we had been inseparable in Weymouth, it had never crossed our minds to exchange addresses. All I knew was that she lived somewhere near Bath. Without Harry, Weymouth lost its charm. That summer, when my mom and sisters went back to the trailer, I stayed home with my dad. We only went down for his vacation time, but for the rest of the summer, I just spent time with my school friends. By the following year, my mother decided it was time for us to join the growing trend of traveling abroad for vacations. My sisters, who by then had boyfriends, had likely pressured her into it since they hated being away from their love interest for so long. Once the caravan was sold, the family switched to taking vacations in the sun, though not by plane. Train journeys stretched out for a full 24 hours. I tagged along for their first couple of trips to Rimini, Italy, but by the time I hit 18, I was more interested in traveling with my friends, so I stopped joining them. By then, music festivals were exploding in popularity, and that's exactly where my friends and I spent every chance we got. The 60s were in full swing, and we made the most of it. After finishing college, I bounced between different jobs, unable to settle into anything for long. At that point, I had my own car, a 1959 Hillman Minx, which I saw as my personal getaway vehicle. One day, after an argument with my boss over something I can't even remember, I quit on the spot, telling him exactly what he could do with the job I already hated. Not long after, while waiting at a traffic light, I got rear-ended by a truck. The driver was apologetic, and somehow I ended up following him back to his company's yard, where his boss promised to replace my damaged bumper. The next day, I returned to have it fixed and waited in the reception area. What happened next was completely unexpected. A man appeared at the door, told me to come with him, and without questioning it, I followed. Before I knew it, I was sitting in the driver's seat of a truck, being given a quick rundown of the controls. When he told me to start the engine and take it for a drive, I simply did as I was told. After about 30 minutes on the road, I parked back at the yard. The guy casually remarked that I was a natural before walking off. As we stepped into the office, his boss, the same man I had met the day before, was in the middle of a conversation. He had apparently asked this guy, Mitch, to test someone else for a driving position, except I was the one who had unknowingly taken the test. Since I was unemployed and the job was suddenly available, I took it. By the following Monday, I was officially a truck driver. The first few months were chaotic. I barely knew what I was doing, but I had an excellent sense of direction, which helped. Back then, truckers looked out for each other, and many experienced drivers took the time to teach me the tricks of the trade, how to properly load a truck, secure cargo, and handle the road. Surprisingly, I loved the job. It was the first time I felt like I belonged in my work. Customers started requesting me specifically, and my boss clearly appreciated having someone reliable on the team. One of the companies I frequently delivered for was Marshall's, a place that ran like a close-knit community. The staff was welcoming, and drivers had full access to the canteen while waiting for their loads. The owner, Old Man Marshall, made a point of knowing all 200-plus employees by name, including the drivers from outside companies. Working in Marshall's dispatch office was Thelma, a woman who knew exactly how to grab attention. Everything about her, the tight blouses, short skirts, and high heels, was designed to turn heads, and she enjoyed every second of it. The other guys practically tripped over themselves trying to impress her. I wasn't one of them. While the others chased her around, I kept things strictly professional, knowing full well she enjoyed being the center of attention. But over time, I found myself going to Marshall's more often, until I was working for them almost exclusively. By early December, things took an unexpected turn. One Friday night, after pulling into the yard to refuel and collect my paycheck, my boss called me into the office. He asked if I had any plans for the next day, which usually meant he needed me for a Saturday job. Instead, he had something else in mind: Marshall's annual Christmas party. The company sent invitations every year, and according to my boss, showing up was a non-negotiable expectation. He asked if I owned a decent suit, and since I did, I agreed to go. We arranged to meet at the yard at 6:30 that evening. My boss would be driving with his wife, and I was set to ride with them. Strangely, two of my colleagues, George and Jack, were taking a separate car, even though the boss's Jaguar had plenty of space for all of us. I found that odd, but didn't think much of it at the time. The next afternoon, I felt awkwardly overdressed. After spending so much time on the road, wearing a suit again felt unnatural. I climbed into my boss's car for the ride to Marshall's factory, where the company's annual celebration was taking place in their enormous cafeteria. For the night, my boss insisted I call him by his first name, Bill, though I knew by Monday it would be back to boss as usual. His wife was introduced with a warmth that made me wonder how he'd managed to marry someone so striking. I figured money had something to do with it, but that was irrelevant. When we arrived, I noticed George and Jack had brought their wives, which explained why they hadn't traveled with us. I found it odd that no one had mentioned bringing a guest. I hadn't planned on bringing anyone, but if spouses were invited, surely girlfriends could be too. It seemed like an oversight. Inside, Bill and his wife were seated at the head table alongside Marshall, his wife, and various company executives. Meanwhile, the rest of us wandered among the tables, searching for our assigned seats. It didn't take long to find places marked for George and Jack and their wives, but my name was nowhere nearby. After a while, I started wondering if I'd been forgotten. If there wasn't a seat for me, I was already considering slipping outside until dinner was over. Just as I was about to step away, Thelma appeared, tapping me on the shoulder and leading me to a chair next to hers. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. Thelma's seat was obviously meant for the date she hadn't brought, and mine was placed where her escort should have been. It was all too convenient, making it clear that someone had arranged this setup. Before the meal began, Marshall himself made his way around the room, stopping to personally thank employees for their work. When he reached me, he expressed appreciation for my efforts and then casually mentioned that Thelma hadn't had a date for the night, so he hoped I wouldn't mind keeping her company. I reassured him I had no problem with it, though I couldn't help but wonder why Thelma, of all people, hadn't been able to find someone to bring. Dinner was catered, allowing the cafeteria staff to enjoy the event alongside everyone else. Some of them were seated at our table, and it was amusing to watch as they carefully examined every dish, silently critiquing the outside caterer's work. Few meals had ever been scrutinized so thoroughly. Once dinner ended, the speeches began, dragging on for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, the tables were cleared and a band started playing, a safe, middle-of-the-road selection designed to appeal to the broad age range in attendance. Thelma and I danced together, though other guys occasionally cut in to claim a turn. By around 10:30, I had indulged in a little too much of the free booze. During a slow dance with Thelma pressed close, I finally asked what had been on my mind all evening. Why hadn't she brought a date? Her answer was unexpected. She laughed, clearly tipsy herself, and admitted she had plenty of options but had chosen to spend the evening with me. She found me interesting. Unlike the other guys, I didn't chase after her. That seemed to intrigue her more than anything. When I didn't respond the way she expected, she prodded further, asking if I found her attractive or if I simply wasn't into women at all. I made it clear that wasn't the case. She was undeniably beautiful. But when she assumed I must already have a girlfriend, I corrected her. I didn't. That only confused her more. If I found her attractive and wasn't taken, then why had I never asked her out? The answer was simple. She was 19 and I was 24, spending most of my week on the road. I wasn't looking for someone who loved attention from every guy in sight. I wanted a steady relationship with someone who was content with quiet nights at the pub, rather than being surrounded by admirers. Thelma seemed momentarily disappointed, but accepted my reasoning. She did, however, make sure to pull me under the mistletoe more times than I could count. Every dance seemed to end beneath that cursed decoration. By the time the party wrapped up around 1 a.m, George let me know that Bill was ready to leave. I walked Thelma to the exit, kissed her goodnight, and as we drove away, I glanced back to see another guy already sliding his arm around her. The next week, I was assigned to a different contract and didn't return to Marshall's. The following week, the company shut down for the holidays. Just after Christmas, my boss roped me into a last-minute job that sent me all the way to Aberdeen for New Year's. At the time, oil exploration in the North Sea was just beginning, and I had been tasked with delivering urgent research equipment. The weather was brutal, and what should have been a quick trip turned into nearly 2 weeks of waiting by the harbor thanks to a delayed ship. At least the local pubs made up for the miserable conditions. There was no better place to spend New Year's Eve than Scotland, even in the middle of a storm. Rain, freezing winds, and relentless gales couldn't dampen the celebration. But as the days stretched on, the novelty of waiting wore thin. When the ship finally arrived, I learned it had been docked in a different port all along, hiding from the storm. No one had bothered to send word to me. As a truck driver, I was the last person on anyone's list of priorities. After returning from Aberdeen, I took a couple of days off to make up for spending New Year's away. My boss wasn't thrilled about it, but he knew better than to push me. I had a reputation for walking away from jobs when pushed too far, and back then, good truck drivers had no trouble finding work elsewhere. By Wednesday morning, I was back on the road, pulling into Marshall's loading bay first thing. When I stepped into the dispatch office, I barely recognized the woman sitting at Thelma's desk. Gone were the flashy outfits and styled hair. Instead, she wore a loose sweater, slacks, and had her hair tied back in a ponytail. The moment she saw me, she jumped up, ran over, and threw her arms around my neck before I could say a word. Whatever I had expected, it wasn't that. Before I knew it, she was kissing me as if we'd been apart for years. When she finally pulled away, she was grinning. It didn't take long to figure out what she was doing. She wanted to prove a point, to show she wasn't the girl I had assumed she was. With a teasing confidence, she handed me my delivery notes for the week and casually mentioned that she had arranged my schedule so I could finish early on Friday. She made it clear she expected me to pick her up that evening. I wasn't sure how to respond without upsetting her, so I went along with it. With a kiss goodbye, I headed back to load my truck. That Friday, I pulled up to her house around 7. To my surprise, she stepped outside carrying an overnight bag. When I hesitated, she explained that my local pub was over 30 miles away, and it only made sense for her to stay the night rather than have me drive back and forth all weekend. So, Thelma spent the weekend at my parents' house. Not in my room, but in my sister's old bedroom. Both had married and moved out by then. The following weekend, I stayed at her parents' house and we explored the bars in her area instead. Her father and younger brother welcomed me immediately, but her mother seemed a little wary at first. Over time, though, she warmed up to me. It didn't take long for Thelma to have me wrapped around her finger. From that weekend on, she never wore anything provocative at work or in daily life, except when she was with me. On those occasions, she dressed to impress, looking as stunning as ever. Early on, I learned she wasn't a maiden. Not that I'd expected her to be. But she also couldn't take birth control due to bad reactions. That meant we were careful, and intimacy wasn't as frequent as it might have been otherwise. 3 months later, we were engaged. Before I knew it, we had put a deposit down on a rundown house almost perfectly situated between both our parents' homes. The next year was spent practically rebuilding it, updating everything, and making it livable. Once the house was finished, the next step was obvious. We got married. The reception, naturally, was held in Marshall's canteen, with the canteen staff handling the catering. Old man Marshall attended, congratulating us with a knowing smile. To this day, I'm not sure how much he was involved in Thelma's plan to win me over. But one thing was clear. She had used her charm to get what she wanted, just as she had with many others. For the next few years, life was good. Thelma became pregnant soon after the wedding. We were careful most of the time, but newlyweds sometimes got caught up in the moment. Our first daughter, Tracy, was born, and we quickly decided to have a second child, Helen, soon after. 2 kids were enough for us, and after some complications during her second pregnancy, Thelma made arrangements for permanent birth control. Doctors had been concerned and kept her under close watch, so it seemed like the best decision. While Thelma was pregnant with Tracy, I received an unexpected call from Old Man Marshall. His transport manager was retiring, and with Thelma on maternity leave, he was struggling to keep things running smoothly. He had already spoken to my boss and wanted to know if I would temporarily step in as transport manager. The timing worked well. I'd be closer to home when Thelma gave birth instead of driving all over the country. So, somewhat reluctantly, I accepted. But when we decided to have a second child, the temporary role became permanent. The job wasn't difficult. It required knowledge of trucks, logistics, and route planning. At first, I missed the freedom of the road, but the pay was better and there were no grueling overtime shifts. Spending time with my daughters made it worthwhile. I had no doubt they'd grow up to be just as charming as their mother, which left me with a few concerns for the future. But I figured I'd deal with that when the time came. Life moved along like it does for most families with young children. I had a steady job, a house, a loving wife, and 2 beautiful daughters. It felt like I had everything I'd ever wanted. But life has a way of throwing unexpected curveballs. Looking back, the first hint that something was off came when Tracy had just turned 6. One morning, while driving to work, I noticed a car behind me. That in itself wasn't unusual. Roads are public, after all. But something about this car felt different, and I had a gut feeling that I wasn't just imagining it. Years of driving trucks had sharpened my instincts. A good driver always stays aware of what's happening on the road, not just ahead but behind as well. Whether it's a crew of thieves eyeing valuable cargo or an unmarked police car ready to catch speeders, knowing who's trailing you is part of the job. One morning, I noticed a car sticking too close. At every intersection, if it got stuck behind, it weaved through traffic to catch up. It was obvious I was being followed. That evening, as I left work, a different car, a woman behind the wheel, picked up my tail and shadowed me all the way home. The next morning, the first car was back, and that night, the woman followed me to the pub. Thursday nights were my usual routine. A drink, just one since I was driving, and a game of snooker with my staff. The woman from the car appeared at the bar shortly after I arrived, followed by the man. They sat separately, pretending not to know each other. It became ridiculous fast. While I played, she sat in full view, flaunting herself and staring at me so intently I could feel her eyes burning into my back. She made a point of catching my eye, flashing smiles every time our gazes met. It was obvious someone was setting me up, but for what? I had a theory. Marshall, the company's owner, treated his business like one big family. He valued loyalty, and I, an outsider, had been welcomed in after marrying one of his favorite employees. Over time, I had become a trusted figure, with people saying I was being groomed for bigger things. That kind of attention could easily make someone jealous. I suspected someone saw me as a threat and wanted to ruin my reputation, or worse, sabotage my marriage and turn Marshall against me. I played along just enough to keep them guessing. After finishing my drink, I ordered another to make it look like I was settling in. Then, after a quick sip, I excused myself to the restroom, slipped out the back door, and drove home, leaving them wondering how long I'd take to return. The next morning, the man was back, tailing me again. This time, I lost him without much effort. But that evening, the woman immediately fell in behind me. Instead of heading home, I led her on a winding route through an industrial area I knew well. The road ended in a dead-end lot where I parked and slipped away between buildings. She didn't notice me circling back until I was standing beside her car door. The moment she realized I had turned the tables, she panicked. Throwing the car in reverse, she screeched backward at full speed, then pulled off a stunt turn so impressive it could have been straight out of a cop show. Within seconds, she was gone. I cursed myself for letting her escape, but figured that was the end of it. They had been exposed and would probably back off. For a couple of weeks, nothing happened. Then, one Thursday night at the pub, another woman was waiting at the bar. At first, I didn't connect her to the others. She struck up casual conversation while I ordered a drink, but when she followed me to the jukebox, it clicked. Annoyed, I shut her down instantly, making it clear I wasn't falling for whatever game they were playing. I also made a not-so-subtle threat about what would happen if I saw the man tailing me again. She looked completely caught off guard and left almost immediately. That was the last I saw of them. About a month later, life took a different turn. Thelma, back to wearing those ridiculous high heels, took a nasty fall and fractured her ankle. I got a panicked call from her at the hospital asking me to come pick up the girls. When I arrived at the hospital, the doctor explained that Thelma's ankle, though not a severe break, needed to be set in a cast. The problem was the swelling. It had to subside before they could proceed, meaning she would have to stay in the hospital for a few days. With the kids on summer break, I had no choice but to take a couple of days off to care for them. Playing both mom and dad for a change was an interesting experience. They found endless amusement in making fun of my cooking skills. Rightfully so. Timing everything to be ready at once was a nightmare. I had no idea how people managed to get all the different parts of a meal done at the same time. That evening, while I struggled with dinner, the phone rang. My hands were full, so I asked Tracy to answer. At 6, she was old enough to handle a simple call, and we had taught her what to say. From the other room, I heard snippets of her conversation. Something about Uncle Frank and how Mommy was in the hospital and that Daddy was looking after them. The call ended quickly, and she returned to the kitchen as if nothing was unusual. Curious, I asked who had called. She casually replied that it was just Uncle Frank. That answer stopped me cold. Who the hell was Uncle Frank? I had never heard of him before. Just as I was about to press her for details, Helen called her from the other room. Tracy ran off, and for some reason I followed but didn't enter the playroom. What I overheard made my stomach drop. Helen scolded her sister, reminding her that she had promised never to tell Daddy about Uncle Frank. Tracy, in typical childish logic, defended herself, insisting that she hadn't really told me. A back-and-forth argument of, "You did and I didn't," followed. I chose to stay quiet. They clearly knew I wasn't supposed to hear about this man, and if I confronted them now, they'd just become more guarded. Better to wait and see what else I could learn. Still, the whole thing gnawed at me. Why would Thelma keep someone a secret from me? There was only one real possibility, but I refused to let my mind go there. Denial is a powerful thing. The next morning, her ankle looked even more swollen than before. A nurse informed me it might take up to a week for the swelling to go down enough for the cast. That meant I needed help at home before my terrible cooking made the girls sick or they starved from refusing to eat it. My sister Sarah offered to stay over and help, bringing her 9-year-old daughter, Marcy. I had never been particularly fond of Marcy. She reminded me too much of her mother, who, even as my sister, had never been my favorite person growing up. Our relationship had improved with age, but old habits die hard. For some reason, I decided to confide in Sarah about the mystery of Uncle Frank. The girls had been sworn to secrecy, but maybe Thelma hadn't told them to keep it from other people. Sarah sat and thought for a while after hearing the story. The unspoken question hung between us. Was Thelma cheating? I admitted I didn't know what to think, but I didn't like my family keeping secrets from me. Growing up, Sarah and our other sister, Ginny, had always left me out of things, and I had hated it. But this was different. I wasn't about to tolerate secrets in my own marriage, especially when another man was involved. Sarah, always blunt, pointed out that Thelma was beautiful and that she had never understood how I had managed to land her. That wasn't news to me, but I corrected her. Thelma had pursued me, not the other way around. Despite her teasing, Sarah offered to try and get the girls to talk. Since they had promised not to tell me, they might feel less guilty about telling her. It was worth a shot. The next morning, I left Sarah with the kids and went to work for a few hours before heading to the hospital in the afternoon. During my visit, Thelma casually mentioned that Sarah had come by with the girls earlier that day. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy. Almost without thinking, I asked if there was anything she wanted to tell me. She looked confused, clearly not understanding what I was really asking. Instead, she rattled off a list of unpaid bills and things that needed to be taken care of at home. Whatever was going on, she wasn't about to confess it to me. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Sarah sat me down in the kitchen with a serious expression. She had been busy digging for answers. Rather than questioning the girls herself, she had sent Marcy to do the job, figuring they wouldn't see her as an adult. According to what Marcy gathered, Thelma had been regularly talking to a man named Frank outside the school while waiting for the girls. Supposedly, Frank was divorced and had children who attended the same school. Since he didn't live with his ex-wife, this was his only opportunity to see them. He claimed his ex made visitation difficult, so he watched them from the playground during recess. That explanation alone didn't sit right. If he was at the school so often, wouldn't his ex-wife, who supposedly worked at my company, have noticed him there? And why had Thelma hidden this from me? The reason, according to the girls, was that their mother didn't want me mentioning Frank to his ex-wife. The logic didn't add up. If Frank was showing up at the school regularly, his ex would already be aware of it. The more Sarah pressed Marcy for details, the stranger things became. Neither Tracy nor Helen could say which kids were supposedly Frank's. In a small school, that was suspicious. More unsettling was the fact that Frank wasn't just appearing at school. He had also been spotted at the park when Thelma took the girls there after school and even during summer break. Worse, he had been with them at the shopping center on multiple occasions, buying the girls treats, ice cream, candy, and hamburgers. Sarah didn't sugarcoat it. Something was very wrong, and I needed to figure it out fast. She suggested that maybe Thelma had planned to meet Frank the day she fell, and that his phone call had been to check why she hadn't shown up. The possibility that my wife was involved in an affair was now staring me in the face. I didn't want to believe it, but the signs were piling up. That night, Sarah urged me to think back over the past few months for anything that seemed unusual. Nothing specific about Thelma came to mind, but then I remembered being followed. I told Sarah about the tailing cars and the two women who had suspiciously tried to approach me at the pub. She couldn't make sense of it either. The following day was much the same. Thelma's ankle was finally showing signs of improvement, and the nurses believed she would be able to go home by the weekend. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Sarah, who had been anxiously waiting for me to return, wasted no time once we were alone. She asked what color the car was that had been following me. When I told her it was a maroon Ford Granada, her reaction was immediate. The girls had described a dark red car in great detail to Marcy. They talked about how big it was, how soft the seats were, and, most disturbingly, how the child locks were on, preventing them from opening the doors from the inside. That detail confirmed it. They hadn't just seen the car. They had been inside it. That was the last straw. I had already taken steps earlier that day, calling in a favor with Bill Wilkins. He had connections with the police and was trying to trace the license plates of the cars that had been following me. The next morning, Bill called me at the office with information. The Granada belonged to a man named Frank Williams, a name now very familiar. According to police records, he was well known to law enforcement. The other two cars had been rented from a low-budget rental company. One hadn't been returned, and the person who rented both had used fake documents. Later that afternoon, I went to the hospital to pick up Thelma. Before letting her know I had arrived, I had a quiet word with the nurse I'd been speaking to all week. With a little coaxing, she revealed that a man had been visiting Thelma every afternoon after I left. What stood out was that he never brought anything with him. No flowers, no cards, nothing. Most visitors, even casual friends, brought at least a token gesture. This man hadn't. That was all I needed to hear. Something was definitely going on, and I intended to find out exactly what. Frank Williams wasn't the type to leave a trail. Men like him knew how to cover their tracks when they were up to no good. But if he thought he could get away with whatever he had planned, he was sorely mistaken. That evening, when we arrived home, Thelma seemed surprised that the girls weren't waiting at the door. As she carefully maneuvered inside on her crutches, she asked where they were. I explained that I had sent them to my parents' house for a few days to give her time to settle in. She insisted it wasn't necessary and that she would have preferred to have them home, but I stood firm. There were things that needed to be dealt with, things that didn't need to upset the children. As she settled on the sofa, Sarah entered the room carrying a tray with tea and coffee. Thelma seemed startled to see her still there and remarked that she hadn't expected company. She reassured us that she was capable of taking care of herself and the kids now that her ankle was in a cast. But Sarah made it clear that she wasn't there for Thelma. She was there for me. Her tone was sharp, her words laced with anger. Thelma's expression instantly changed. Her face went pale as she turned toward me, demanding to know what was going on. That was exactly what I had intended to ask her. I wanted to hear, in her own words, what had been happening between her and Frank Williams. She hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right response, then seemed to make up her mind. Without much emotion, she admitted the truth. She had fallen in love with someone else. She had been planning to leave me, file for divorce, and marry Frank. She hadn't figured out how to tell me yet, but insisted she had never meant to hurt me. Before Sarah could react, a noise from the hallway caught everyone's attention. A female voice cut through the silence, saying that she had heard enough. The front door clicked shut, and whoever had been standing outside was gone. Sarah and I exchanged glances before I turned back to Thelma. Her claim of wanting to handle things with care was a joke. The plan had been clear all along. She and Frank had tried to set me up. The idea was for me to fall for one of Frank's women, get caught in a compromising situation, and hand her the perfect reason to divorce me. That way, she could leave me, keep the house, and secure financial support. But they had failed. I hadn't fallen into their trap. Her plan had been to walk away from a stable life, from a man with a solid job, to shack up with an unemployed con artist, expecting me to foot the bill for their new life together. She denied any knowledge of a setup, feigning innocence, but I had no interest in arguing. If she wanted answers, she could ask her new boyfriend. The terms were simple. She had until the weekend to clear her belongings from my house. My lawyer had already started the paperwork, and she would have the divorce documents in front of her by Monday. She protested, claiming that it was me who should leave since she needed the house for the children, but that wasn't happening. She and Frank Williams weren't getting anywhere near my kids. I'd already taken action with social services, and they were in the process of obtaining a legal order to ensure she couldn't have unsupervised access to them. She would only be allowed to see them under the watchful eye of a caseworker, or me. Thelma refused to believe it. She insisted social services wouldn't interfere like that. She was wrong. They had been more than willing to act the moment they learned about Frank Williams. The fact that she had been bringing him around our daughters had made them move fast. And that wasn't the worst of it. There was a good chance the police would be getting involved, too. Confusion flickered across her face. She didn't understand why law enforcement would be interested in her personal life. Sarah had no patience left. Without hesitation, she laid it all out. Frank Williams wasn't some misunderstood man with a troubled past. He was a predator. He had a record a mile long, and the real reason he had been hanging around outside that school had nothing to do with Thelma. It had been about the kids. Thelma looked from me to Sarah, disbelief etched across her face. She insisted it was a lie. Frank would never do something like that. But the facts spoke for themselves. She thought he had spent the past 7 years working overseas, but in reality, he had been locked up, serving time at Parkhurst, a maximum security prison. The truth would come out soon enough. The police would be questioning him, and more importantly, they would be speaking with my daughters. If I found out he had done anything to them, there wouldn't be enough cops in the world to stop me from making sure he paid for it. Before Thelma could respond, her body went limp, and she collapsed. Sarah had to call an ambulance. No matter how much we tried, we couldn't wake her. Her father or brother must have picked her up from the hospital later because I certainly wasn't going to do it. I didn't see her again until the day we signed the divorce papers. By then, she had accepted reality. Social services had made sure she had no chance of gaining custody. Her involvement with Frank had put the children at risk, and the court order remained in place. That was the last time I ever had to deal with her. Eventually, the truth surfaced. Thelma had left the children in Williams's care more than once, usually while she was at the hair salon or running errands. However, after being thoroughly questioned, the specialists assured me that no harm had come to them. They believed Williams was still in what they termed the grooming phase, carefully building trust and avoiding anything that might scare them off. Legally, Williams hadn't committed any chargeable offenses. The authorities were certain he had stolen the rental car, but had never carried out whatever he had planned, likely abandoning his scheme once things started to unravel. When I asked why they believed he had stolen the car, the lead investigator gave me a grim explanation. Williams had a history. The last woman he manipulated had been a widow, her husband liquidated in a hit-and-run that remained unsolved. While there was no proof tying Williams to that crime, the police suspected it wasn't a coincidence. They could only speculate about his intent with the stolen vehicle, but they assured me that if he stuck around, he wouldn't be given much room to operate. The officer subtly implied that certain lapses in surveillance could occur should Williams find himself in harm's way. While no one could condone vigilante justice, they were well aware that men like Williams thrived on slipping through legal loopholes. The message was clear. If something were to happen to him, as long as it wasn't fatal, the response might not be immediate. He also warned me not to be too harsh on Thelma. Williams was an expert manipulator. Sitting across from him in the interrogation room, he appeared utterly disarming, the kind of man who could convince anyone of his innocence. Thelma had never stood a chance once he set his sights on her. It wasn't until she was confronted with his full criminal record that she finally grasped what kind of predator he truly was. Looking back, I realized just how close I had come to real danger. Williams had been preparing for every possible scenario, but knowing what he had intended for my family, I had no intention of simply letting it go. I was patient. I could wait for the right time. For the next 2 years, things remained in constant motion. Thelma was prohibited from seeing the children without supervision, which was frustrating for both her and the girls. She couldn't take them anywhere on her own, and their visits were restricted. Based on everything I had learned from the police and from my own observations, I didn't believe Thelma had knowingly put our daughters in danger. If she had truly understood what Williams was, I knew she wouldn't have tolerated it. For my own peace of mind, I had to believe that. After a year, I requested that social services ease the restrictions on Thelma's visits, and they agreed. Since the children had never been formally placed in state care, the final decision had always rested with me. From time to time, Thelma expressed a desire to reconcile, but I shut that idea down immediately. There was no going back. I had spoken with neighbors who had seen Williams's car parked outside her house during the school day. There was no doubt in my mind that she was still involved with him. Whatever she claimed, I knew they weren't sitting inside reading scripture, though considering the number of biblical references to begetting, maybe they were. I made it clear that she should find someone else to play the fool. Eventually, she did. The man she met was decent, though a bit impulsive. He seemed to care for her, but when Thelma finally confessed everything about her past, he simply stood up and walked out without a word. 2 weeks later, Thelma snapped. She spotted Williams loitering near another school, called the police, and they picked him up for questioning. But when he was released, she waited outside the station and without hesitation drove straight into him as he walked down the street. Afterward, she sped to the river and plunged her car into the water. While some assumed it was a self-destruction attempt, I had my doubts. The timing was too perfect. There had been a police vehicle right behind her. Initially, she was charged with manslaughter, but the case quickly fell apart. Psychiatrists determined that her mental state was too unstable for her to stand trial, and the charges were dropped. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation, but they deemed her no threat to the public and released her within a month. From then on, she was required to see a psychiatrist regularly, but that was the extent of her punishment. Social services, however, tightened restrictions on her visits with the children once again. That was how it all ended. Around that time, Sarah's husband, Ralph, started working on the North Sea oil rigs. With him away for long periods, Sarah and the kids moved in with me, both to help raise the girls and to manage Thelma's limited visitations. Over time, those visits became fewer and farther between. Eventually, it felt as if she had faded out of our lives completely. I think it was just before Helen's 10th birthday when things took an unexpected turn. One evening, Sarah, Ralph, and I sat around the kitchen table reminiscing about our childhood. Inevitably, the conversation drifted to the summers we had spent in Weymouth. On a whim, Ralph suggested that we take the kids there for a vacation. Sarah jumped at the idea and, before either of us could object, had already invited our older sister Ginny and her family to join us. That summer, we rented 3 caravans side by side on the very same site where we had spent our childhood holidays. The kids loved every moment of it, playing on the beach, running through the old familiar streets. listening as we pointed out places we had explored as children. It was more than just a vacation. It was a return to something simpler, something untouched by everything that had happened in the years before. Even after all that time, we found familiar faces, people we had known in those long-ago summers. For the first time in years, life felt normal again. One morning, I took my daughters for a walk along the cliffs, retracing the steps of my childhood. The landscape had changed dramatically over the years, with erosion reshaping the coastline, but I was determined to find something familiar. After some searching, I finally located the tree where Harry and I had carved our initials each summer. Some of the markings had faded, but a few remained legible, reminders of a time long past. Tracy examined the engravings, curiously reading aloud, wondering who the initials belonged to and what had become of them. When I casually admitted that one of those initials was mine, she was stunned. Naturally, the next question followed. Who was the other H? I brushed it off, calling her an old friend, but my daughters weren't satisfied with that vague answer. Helen, wide-eyed with curiosity, asked if Harry had been my childhood sweetheart. I hadn't anticipated the conversation taking this turn. In a way, Harry had been a special part of my life, though I wasn't sure if the term sweetheart fit. I'd only kissed her once, a memory I had held onto for years. That response only fueled their curiosity. Tracy pressed for details, asking if the kiss had been nice, though whether she was genuinely interested or just trying to fluster me was hard to tell. I admitted that it had been, but the moment passed quickly, as Harry had never returned the following summer. That revelation seemed to sadden them, and I quickly changed the subject. Still, for the remainder of the vacation, my daughters were relentless. Everywhere we went, they wanted to know if I had been there with Harry. Sarah and Ginny wasted no time joining in on the teasing. Whenever Tracy or Helen asked about a place, they answered for me, exaggerating stories and making sure I had no opportunity to downplay my childhood connection to Harry. They even went as far as decorating cakes with markings that bore a suspicious resemblance to H&H. No matter how much I protested, it only made them laugh more. Eventually, I had to give in and laugh along with them. When the vacation ended and we returned home, things only escalated. With some encouragement from the girls, my parents dug through old photo albums, pulling out childhood pictures of me and Harry. There were plenty of them, evidence of summers spent together. I'll give my daughters credit for one thing. Even though Harry's birthmark was prominent in many of the pictures, neither Tracy nor Helen ever mentioned it. Whether my sisters had warned them not to ask, I'll never know, but it was never brought up. The following year, we returned to Weymouth, but this time it was just me, the girls, Sarah, and Marcy. Ralph had been set to join us, but at the last minute, he claimed work had come up. Sarah's lack of reaction surprised me, considering how much time he already spent away on the oil rigs. We managed to squeeze everyone into my car, with our luggage strapped to the roof for the drive. The first few days passed pleasantly as we settled in, enjoying the familiar surroundings. Then, on Tuesday morning at breakfast, my daughters decided they wanted to find the carved tree again. By mid-morning, we set off. The three girls were unusually energetic that day, singing and skipping along the path, as if they were anticipating something exciting. As soon as we reached the tree, Tracy sprinted ahead, practically shouting in triumph. She gestured wildly at the trunk, exclaiming that something had changed. Sarah and I approached, and as the girls stepped aside, I saw what had startled them. Beneath the 1959 carving, a fresh one had been added. H&H, 1982. I stared at it, struggling to process what I was seeing. Then, from the nearby bushes, Ralph emerged, accompanied by two children I didn't recognize. Without explanation, he relayed a message. Harry had sent him to find me. She was waiting in a place I would remember, our old childhood hiding spot, the one we used to spy on the young couples sneaking away together. She wanted to see me alone. I didn't hesitate. I broke into a jog, heading straight for the spot. But when I arrived, there was no one there. Disappointed and confused, I turned to leave, only to be ambushed. Harry leaped out from behind a tree, just as we used to do as kids. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. The years had vanished in an instant. We fell into the same playful rhythm, joking and bantering as if no time had passed at all. When we returned to the tree, the others had disappeared, leaving us alone to catch up. As we walked, I told her about my life. The condensed version, at least. She shared her story as well. After her father passed, her mother had struggled financially and had been forced to sell their caravan. Losing Weymouth had been just as heartbreaking for her as it had been for me. In time, her mother remarried, this time to a kind and generous man. When Harry was in her mid-teens, her stepfather paid an enormous sum for one of the earliest laser treatments to reduce her birthmark. While not entirely successful, the procedure improved her confidence immensely. Then, she surprised me with something I hadn't expected. She confessed that, aside from the laser treatment, the only other thing that had ever boosted her self-esteem so much was me. I had been the only child she had ever met who had never questioned or commented on her birthmark. Not once. That had meant everything to her. Harry's life had taken many turns. She had married a soldier and had 2 children with him. But tragedy had struck in 1978 when he was liquidated in a training accident. Since then, she had moved back in with her stepfather after losing her mother to a stroke. That was where Ralph had found her. I didn't ask how he had managed it. Later, Sarah revealed that Ralph had enlisted nearly every guy on his oil rig who lived near Bath, spreading word and asking questions. Somehow, against all odds, he had tracked her down. Eventually, someone recalled a girl with a boy's name and a distinctive birthmark. That was all it took. Ralph had tracked her down weeks before our vacation, but they had all decided to keep it a secret from me until the right moment. According to Sarah, there were a few times when Tracy and Helen almost spilled the beans, but they'd managed to keep the surprise intact. Harry and her 2 children ended up staying with us in the caravan for the remainder of the trip. Despite the history we shared, we didn't jump into anything impulsively. Our childhood bond had been something special, and now, as adults, we were rediscovering what we meant to each other. There was an undeniable connection, but where it would lead remained to be seen. Whether it would turn into something deeper, I couldn't say for sure. But I hoped it would, and judging by my daughter's enthusiasm, they were rooting for the same outcome. Everyone else, including Harry's kids, seemed to sense this and gave us as much space as possible, allowing us time to reconnect. At the end of the vacation, Ralph and Sarah took Tracy and Helen home with them, while I drove Harry and her children, Russell and Claire, back to Bath. Life moved forward. April 2006. Over the next 6 months, frequent trips up and down the M4 became the norm. Eventually, Harry and her children, Russell and Claire, moved in with me and the girls, blending our families under one roof. It wasn't without its challenges. One unexpected complication arose when Helen and Tracy started calling Harry Mom and referred to their biological mother simply as Thelma. Harry and I tried to discourage it by refusing to respond when they called her that, but their determination outmatched ours. With the help of Russell and Claire, who echoed everything the girls said, Harry had no choice but to answer, and the habit stuck. Thelma was less than pleased. While I never knew the exact details of what was said between her and the girls, she ultimately had no choice but to accept it. Harry suspected the girls had made it clear that if she fought them on it, they would cut ties with her entirely. What surprised me most was how their resentment toward Thelma seemed to intensify with age. As time passed, Harry pointed out something I hadn't fully considered. My daughters weren't naive. As they grew older, they pieced together what had nearly happened to them. They came to understand why social workers and police officers had asked them all those odd, seemingly random questions years before. The realization of just how close they had come to being in real danger left a lasting mark on them. Of course, in time, Harry and I married. We took our time, making sure everything was right. The wedding itself was simple. No elaborate ceremony, no grand event. Instead, we quietly tied the knot in Bermuda, choosing to keep it private. We had local witnesses, but no one else knew until long after it had happened. It was amusing to see how long it took people to notice the new ring on Harry's finger. As the years passed, Thelma's mental health declined. A string of unstable relationships didn't help, and she seemed to drift further from reality. By the time Tracy married Russell, her stepbrother through circumstance, not blood, Thelma was just coherent enough to attend the wedding and play the role of a proud mother. That day, she looked better than she had in years, and her father, beaming with pride, escorted her down the aisle. Sadly, her father passed away a few months later. After that, her condition rapidly deteriorated. Eventually, her brother had her involuntarily committed to a private clinic. She has spent much of her time since then cycling in and out of treatment. Keeping her care financially covered hasn't been easy. Both her brother and I have taken on the cost. But I feel a sense of obligation. Regardless of everything that happened, she is still the mother of my children, and I couldn't bring myself to abandon that responsibility. Meanwhile, Harry and I have built a beautiful life together. Now that all the children are grown and have moved on with their own lives, we spend most of our time at our cottage near Weymouth. It feels full circle, returning to the same coastal paths we walked as children, reliving memories while creating new ones. sometimes with our grandchildren in tow. Life moves forward as it always does.